Introduce our keynote speaker first and then the respondents, and I will be strict in the chair because time is precious. So could I now call on Anna Lawson, Senior Lecturer in the University of Leeds, to give the keynote address on the role of the Academy in advancing positive reform. You're very welcome and thank you.
Higher education. Higher education institutions have a fundamental role in driving prosperity and well-being for our continent. We need you to play this part to the full.
Education, and in particular higher education and its links with research and innovation, plays a crucial role in individual and societal advancement. Higher education institutions are thus crucial partners in delivering the European Union strategy to drive forward and maintain growth.
Higher education is a powerful driver of economic growth and opens doors to better living standards and opportunities for people. It is also the best insurance against unemployment.
The topics covered by the Higher Education series reflect the commitment of the Council of Europe to the basic values of democracy, human rights and the rule of law, and its belief that education and higher education play a key role in developing the democratic culture without which democratic societies cannot thrive, as well as in developing the skills, knowledge and values that modern complex societies require.
Okay, thank you. Those are a few quotes. Just to set the rest of this discussion in context. The first three are from the European Commission and stress the fundamental role of academia, higher education in its Europe 2020 strategy to promote smart, sustainable and inclusive growth. And the last one from the Council of Europe stresses the link between higher education, democracy and human rights. So the question we're concerned with today is how academia, how higher education can contribute to achieving positive reform in the disability context. I want to tackle that by looking at two main questions. First of all, what contributions could academia make, can academia make? And second, how can such contributions be enabled and enhanced? So first of all then, what contributions can academia make? And it makes sense to think about this by focusing on its three main outward-looking functions, which are through its students, its teaching, through its research and through its community engagement. So turning first to students. First of all, academia can contribute to the move towards positive disability reform by widening the boundaries of its disciplines to include disability rights perspectives in many areas covered by curricula. There was a lot of debate in the 1990s about the need for sociology to embrace disability perspectives as well as gender and race. That, I think, is now creeping into the law arena, and Lisa might have more to say on this later. But it's still uncomfortably slow for those of us who are concerned with disability law. Still, many of the leading human rights textbooks don't have significant discussion of disability or the CRPD. And recently I looked at the leading UK medical law and ethics textbooks and was really disappointed to see that disability rights and the CRPD were hardly mentioned at all. So there's a lot of work to be done in widening discipline boundaries. Not just in social sciences and law, but also in things like engineering, architecture, medicine. Developing disability-specific courses and programmes. And there are some excellent examples around Europe, and many students here today are currently studying on these courses, so it's great that they're here. developing relevant research skills, and this again is something very dear to the Europe 2020 strategy, the need for more researchers in the population to contribute to growth, to contribute to innovation. And a key way in which researchers become researchers is through receiving training, especially in doctoral programs. And the EU has done important work to advance this by supporting the DREAM network, and again, it's really lovely to know that the students on that programme are here today. But Europe 2020 does want 1 million more researchers by 2020, so there's still quite a bit more to be done. Community engagement. So students, as well as staff in universities, engaged in community engagement activities, perhaps through law clinics focusing on disability, which I know Galway has excelled at, through research clinics, offering research advice and support to disabled people's organisations. Students can also become involved, acquire relevant experience through internships in maybe disabled people's organisations, but also in other organisations that are concerned with the process of reform, like government bodies, parliaments, other human rights organisations. And participating in conferences and debates, such as this one. Okay, the second main university activity, research. So universities, academia can contribute to the process of positive disability reform through its research in various ways. First, by providing an evidence base for the existence and the nature of social problems that need to be tackled. They need policy or law interventions to tackle. And again, there are people participating in this event today who've contributed very significantly in these ways, including on the issue of institutionalisation, which was mentioned earlier. So highlighting the existence of social problems, providing evidence that these problems exist and what their impact is on people, the need for change. A second way is through suggestions about possible solutions. And this might be through creative thinking, it might be through evidence drawn from maybe looking at comparative studies at how similar problems are tackled elsewhere, and through analysis. I was really struck by a very interesting observation in the International Disability Alliance response to the World's Disability Report, which was, I think I've got it here. However, it had many praises for the World Disability Report, but one of its criticisms was, however, the focus on evidence-based research means that many of the innovative and relevantly recent examples of implementing the CRPD were not included because of lack of scientific evidence to support them. And that's a problem. If we become so dependent on an evidence base before we can think innovatively and creatively about solutions, then that is a problem. But academia shouldn't confine itself to providing the evidence. It does also need to engage creatively and innovatively with solutions. Policy law and monitoring. So a third way in which academia can contribute to the process of positive reform is by monitoring the impact, the effectiveness of existing policies at mainstreaming disabled people, at dealing with disability, or maybe the impact of new policies upon disabled people. And important examples of this are, first of all, I think, the work by Gerard Quinn and Teresa Tejano in 2002 on the extent to which disability was mainstreamed into the work of the human rights bodies at that time. And that was very important because it showed that there were problems, and those provided very powerful arguments for the development of the CRPD. Volume 3 of the Yearbook, which we've touched on already, has another important article by Mark Priestley discussing the work of the academic network of European disability experts on monitoring the extent to which disability has been mainstreamed into various OMC processes, open method of coordination processes, and again draws attention to the fact that there are problems with the extent to which that's happened, and a need for a rethink about how to make that effective. Community engagement, the third area in which universities traditionally work, but maybe less obviously than in the first two. Many universities now do have explicit published community engagement policies in which they align themselves expressly to particular values, and these often include reducing inequality, supporting community cohesion, both at the local level around where the university is based, but also more widely. Those activities, or activities aligned to those values, would obviously be well placed to include ones relating to disability and facilitating inclusion of disabled people in the local community or the broader community. Okay, so turning to the second main question now then, how can these contributions, these possible contributions, be enabled and enhanced? Okay, so first of all, by improving the inclusiveness and openness of academia. And the starting point for this is obviously enhancing accessibility and non-discrimination within academic institutions themselves. There's been a number of very interesting studies on higher education, although far fewer than on primary and secondary education. One of them was published in July 2012, and it was funded by the European Commission. It was by the Independent Network of Experts on Social Sciences. And it drew attention to the lack of reliable data on disabled student engagement in higher education in Europe, and called for improvements in that regard. But it was clear from what data there was that numbers are still lower than they should be. And it was also clear that, from various research studies that it quoted, that the disabled students who are there often experience barriers, that they're not totally included. There's often inaccessible physical environments, also big problems with inaccessible information, access to information in an accessible format, and then problems around reasonable accommodations, around exams and teaching sometimes as well. So there's work to be done there, especially given the big impact that higher education has on disabled people. Statistics suggest that disabled graduates are much less disadvantaged as compared with their disabled counterparts than disabled people who are not graduates. Another important study I think is worth mentioning is the one by the OECD in 2003, which really paid a lot of attention to the institutional and financial structures that can either operate to facilitate inclusion or to block it. And those are things that we need to think about. And the third way, making research and data available. So academia is the possessor of the keys to a huge fund of knowledge and research information. Opening up that information to policymakers, to disabled people's organisations and campaigners for change in a way that's accessible to disabled people, as well as available, is really important. Okay, the second main way that these contributions of academia can be enhanced is by collaborations. And in effect, I've got 3 more ways, but they're all about collaborations. So the first of them is collaborations within academia. And for this to be effective, really there needs to be a strong organising focus or ideology for these collaborations to focus around. And the social model of disability has provided a focus for many such developments in the past and continues to do so. And the CRPD itself, which is obviously very closely linked with the social model, could itself provide an organising focus. So these collaborations could need to be between disciplines. Turning back to volume 3 of the yearbook, it's nice to see in that such collaborations existing, both in terms of, in terms of the coverage, but also in terms of the background of the contributors. So there are contributors from disciplines of sociology, law, engineering. And also within disciplines themselves, so within law, there's an interesting article by Hofmans on disability rights and policy in the context of the broader fundamental rights agenda, and drawing on insights from both those areas. And similarly, Willens draws on insights from the arena of the rights of the child and links that to disability. So making links across disciplines, between disciplines, is really important. Between institutions and between countries. Now, I have just a couple of examples of this. The Academic Network of European Disability Experts is a very good example of this sort of collaboration. And the yearbook itself, again, is a collaboration between institutions in different countries, focusing on disability and the need for change. Third, collaborations between academia and disabled people's organisations. Through these collaborations, the student-related contributions that academia can make can be significantly enhanced through the internships, the community engagement I mentioned, and through input into teaching as well. Without collaboration with disabled people's organisations, I think it's unlikely that students will develop the passion, the commitment to change that is really needed in order for people in academia to contribute meaningfully towards the process of positive reform. This kind of collaboration can also enhance the research-related contributions of academia through gaining strategic advice and direction from disabled people's organisations in terms of what is important as an issue of research, what topics should be researched, and the URAID project that EDF engaged in is really helpful on this. But also within projects as well, so just giving strategic advice and direction on the process of particular projects, and especially with emancipatory research projects to ensure that the process really is emancipatory and that there is a support for the disabled participants in research to link to and become politically active if that's what they choose to do. And also, these collaborations are really essential to the enriching interplay of ideas between academia and disabled people's organisations that will enrich both and strengthen advocacy campaigns. Fourth, the last collaboration is with other actors in the reform process. So I put examples of who these actors are. I think particularly important are politicians and policymakers. And it's great to have an event like this that brings these different people together. I think it's really important to remember, for us to remember in academia, that, and maybe for disabled people's organisations as well, to remember that there's a huge amount of expertise on disability amongst people who are engaged in policy making, and that's really well illustrated by the article by Ema Placentia and others on the dialogue between the EU and the US on the accessibility of ICT in the third volume of the Yearbook. So knowledge exchange can work both ways, capacity building, but particularly important is guidance from policymakers and politicians about how we can contribute helpfully, when we can contribute, how our contribution should be presented, what would be the most effective in terms of engaging that audience. Okay, so to conclude, I think the commitment to change and reform is fundamentally important. And that can't happen if we try to cling to the old-fashioned notion that academic research is neutral and objective. And I think, thankfully, certainly within the disability studies movement and law movement, there's a strong realisation that that's not the case. We are working for change. We're in this job because we want things to change. And that's beautifully expressed by the words of Mike Oliver in 1996, one of the leading UK disability researchers, who talked of research being part of the journey to utopia. And then he said, for me, this is a society where people with impairments live and flourish alongside everyone else, but where disabling barriers and disableist values and attitudes have disappeared. That's what we want, and the CRPD gives us a very powerful tool to use as part of that journey. Collaboration is essential in order to make it, and I've mentioned 3 types of collaboration already. Financial support is also really important to fund research in a way that can be inclusive of disabled people, and EDF has done very important work in connection with Horizon 2020 on ensuring that systems for providing research can be administered in a way that is disability inclusive. Okay. Structural support is also really important. Within institutions, so the systems that govern promotion, for instance, what's valued within an organisation? Is the community engagement side valued when it comes to promotion, annual reviews, or is that regarded as an optional extra? And dissemination is vitally important. And the Yearbook, I think, is a brilliant example of the power of dissemination. It brings together, as we've already heard, in one place, a huge range of different developments across Europe. It also includes critical analysis on topical issues. And well, it's certainly been useful to me, and I know to others in Europe, and I was struck when I was talking to somebody from Japan who knew so much about Europe. I asked her how she knew so much, and she said, oh, it's because of the European Yearbook. And that's made me greedy, because now I want yearbooks on other areas of the world as well. And it's great that one is developing in Africa. And I think it's also important to note that the publishers of the Yearbook, Intersentia, are making very positive efforts to make this yearbook more accessible to disabled people, including by making it available in an electronic form. And that's a really positive development, and I hope it's one that won't be limited to the yearbook and will spread across to other practices of Incentia and also other publishers as well. So finally, it is my very great pleasure to announce that the yearbook the third volume of the yearbook is now launched.